The 13th century was a time when the world trembled at the sound of galloping hooves. From the endless steppes of Mongolia emerged warriors whose banners carried fear farther than any empire before them. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan, the Mongols built a realm that stretched from the Yellow Sea to the gates of Europe. Yet, behind the stories of lightning-fast conquests and military genius lies another, darker layer, the fate of countless women who found themselves trapped in the storm of empire building. When a Mongol army approached a city, its reputation alone often determined what came next. Some towns surrendered without resistance, hoping to be spared. Others resisted, and for them the consequences were dire. Chronicles describe how, once walls fell, the victors divided the population. Men were separated as potential threats, while women and children were gathered under the strict watch of soldiers. In these moments, an entire life could change in the blink of an eye. For the women, there was no single destiny. Some were marched across the vast steppe to serve as attendants or workers in the nomadic camps. Others were taken into households of generals or khans themselves, becoming part of the intricate hierarchy that existed within the Mongol world. It was not always a story of chains and despair. At times, survival meant adaptation. A clever woman who could sing, weave, or interpret languages might find herself valued in unexpected ways. But survival carried its own cost. The sudden loss of family, home, and freedom left scars deeper than any wound of battle. Imagine standing in a line among hundreds, waiting to learn your fate, not knowing whether you would remain a servant in a foreign tent or be sent on a march across continents. This uncertainty was its own form of torment, an invisible weapon wielded by the conquerors. Historical sources from Persia, China, and even Europe mention how the Mongols considered women as part of the spoils of war, not only as symbols of victory, but as pieces in a grand political game. By marrying or gifting women of noble origin, Khans forged alliances and cemented loyalty among their commanders. A single marriage could reshape the balance of power across half a continent. And yet, within this machinery of empire, remarkable stories emerge. Some women, captured as enemies, became trusted confidants or even wives of powerful leaders. Their influence reached far beyond the silk curtains of the tent. Whispers tell of queens and consorts who advised on matters of diplomacy, or who subtly steered decisions that altered the fate of cities. For every tale of despair, there was another of resilience, cunning, and survival. But make no mistake, the majority of stories remain shrouded in silence. The voices of common women, swept away in the tide of conquest, were rarely recorded. Their lives became anonymous footnotes in chronicles that glorified khans and generals. This silence itself is haunting. It leaves us to imagine the daily struggles, the tears hidden behind veils, and the quiet endurance of those who had no choice but to adapt. The Mongol horde was more than a military force. It was a moving world of people, cultures, and contradictions. Women, whether captives, wives, or allies, formed an invisible foundation for this world. They cooked, healed, managed households, and bore children who would inherit the empire. Their labor sustained the warriors who rode across continents, and their presence shaped the human face of an empire too often seen only through its conquests. In the end, the shadow that fell upon them was not only fear of violence, but the loss of identity. A daughter of Persia might find herself in China. A Russian noblewoman could wake up in a yurt on the Mongolian steppe. Torn from their roots, these women became living symbols of the empire's reach, scattered stars across an unfamiliar sky. And this is where our story begins. In the quiet after the storm, when the hooves have passed, the smoke still lingers, and women stand on the edge of the unknown. Their stories, often hidden, hold the key to understanding not just the brutality of conquest, but the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable upheaval. The image of the Mongols often brings to mind galloping riders and smoke rising from burning cities. Yet, once the chaos of battle subsided, life inside the moving camps of the empire revealed another world. A world where women played roles both visible and invisible, shaping the rhythm of daily survival. The Mongol camp, or Ordu, was a vast mobile city. Thousands of felt yurts, arranged in circles, formed a living organism that could pack up and move within hours. At the center stood the great tent of the Khan, richly decorated with silks and guarded by his most loyal warriors. Around it, the camps of generals and nobles sprawled outward, and beyond them, the tents of common soldiers and their families. Here, among the smoke of fires and the smell of horse leather, women lived lives both ordinary and extraordinary. Captured women often found themselves working in the practical heart of these camps. They cooked meals for soldiers, tended fires, milked animals, and sewed garments. The Mongol warriors relied on speed and mobility, and it was the tireless work of these women that sustained that lifestyle. Without them, even the fiercest army could not have survived the endless marches across deserts and mountains. But daily tasks did not end with labor. Women also became guardians of culture. Many brought with them traditions of their homelands, weaving Persian rugs, preparing Chinese teas, or telling stories from the Slavic forests. Around evening fires, fragments of these cultures mingled, creating a strange mosaic within the Mongol world. For the Khans, this mixture was a source of pride. Their empire was not only built on conquest but on absorbing the skills and knowledge of others. Yet life in the camp was not equal for all. A clear hierarchy determined the fate of each woman. Noble-born captives, especially those from royal families, were treated differently. Some were offered as wives to Mongol princes, cementing political alliances. Others became concubines of high-ranking generals. For them, survival depended on navigating the delicate web of rivalries within the court. A wrong word, a careless gesture, could mean exile to the farthest edge of the empire. In contrast, common women had fewer paths. Most remained servants, yet even here stories of resilience shine through. Chronicles tell of women who learned the Mongol language, adapted to the nomadic way of life, and eventually earned trust. Some became healers, tending to wounds with herbs brought from their homelands. Others gained recognition as singers or dancers, providing rare moments of joy in a world consumed by war. The Ordu itself was a place of constant vigilance. Guards patrolled the perimeters, and every sound at night carried tension. For women, safety was always uncertain. Their existence was shaped by the mood of their captors, the decisions of generals, and the fragile politics that could change overnight. Still, many found ways to endure, by forming bonds with one another, sharing food, or whispering songs that reminded them of distant homes. Interestingly, Mongol law, based on the Code of Yasa, provided a strange kind of order. The Yasa demanded loyalty and discipline, punishing theft or betrayal harshly. In this system, some women found a degree of protection, however limited. Even the Khans valued stability within their ranks, and mistreatment of valuable captives was sometimes forbidden. Survival often depended on one's ability to appear useful, to offer skills, loyalty, or even silence. Yet behind these patterns lay an unspoken truth. Every woman in the camp lived on borrowed time. She was a symbol of conquest, but also a tool in the machinery of empire. Today she might cook for soldiers. Tomorrow she could be offered as a gift to a new ally. Her fate was a shifting horizon, just like the endless steppes stretching under the Mongol sky. And still, amid this uncertainty, seeds of influence were planted. Some women learned how to turn survival into opportunity. They whispered advice to generals, taught the children of nobles, or offered counsel on matters their captors did not fully understand. In doing so, they left subtle fingerprints on decisions that echoed far beyond the campfires. The Mongol Ordu was a paradox, brutal and fragile, terrifying and strangely ordered. For the women within it, life was an endless negotiation between despair and resilience. Each sunrise brought new uncertainty, but also a chance, however slim, to carve out a place in the shadow of the Khan's empire. Behind the roar of horses and the clash of steel lay another, quieter battlefield, the chambers of the Mongol rulers. While the steppe warriors conquered kingdoms, their courts became centers of intrigue, where women played roles more significant than many chronicles dare to admit. The Mongol Khans, especially the descendants of Genghis, maintained harems that reflected both their wealth and political power. These harems were not merely places of pleasure. They were institutions of influence. Within them lived women from every corner of the empire. Chinese princesses, Persian noblewomen, captured Rus daughters, and even widows of defeated rulers. Each carried with her not only beauty but also political weight, for her presence symbolized an alliance, a conquest, or a claim to legitimacy. Life inside the harem was a mixture of splendor and silent competition. The most favored women enjoyed silks, jewelry, and attendants of their own. They dined on delicacies from conquered lands, their tables filled with Persian fruits, Chinese teas, and steppe cheeses. But beneath the surface, rivalry pulsed like a hidden current. Every smile was calculated, every word a weapon. For a woman in the harem, survival often meant mastering the art of silence, speaking only when necessary, observing always, and waiting for the right moment to act. Some of these women wielded influence over the khans in surprising ways. A whisper in the ear of a ruler could sway decisions on war or peace. A tearful plea might save a city, while a clever suggestion could change the fate of a noble family. Although the chronicles written by men often overlooked their roles, occasional glimpses reveal how queens and consorts shaped history. One of the most striking examples was Sorgatani Beki, the widow of Talyui and mother of 4 great khans, including Kublai Khan. Though not a captive, her story illuminates the heights to which women in the Mongol world could rise. Sorgatani was respected for her wisdom, diplomacy, and ability to maintain alliances. In her hands, the empire's future was secured. Her example must have inspired countless women within the harems, proof that influence, though hidden, was possible. But not all women had such fortune. Many lived in perpetual uncertainty, dependent on the whims of their masters and the rivalries within the harem walls. A single rumor of disloyalty could end a life of privilege and reduce it to servitude. Yet even here, resilience shone through. Women supported one another, formed secret alliances, and found strength in shared stories whispered at night. The harems were also cultural crossroads. Languages mixed, Persian poetry echoed alongside Chinese songs, while Slavic lullabies soothed the children of khans. Through these women, the Mongol court absorbed the traditions of half the known world. They embroidered patterns from Samarkand, performed dances from India, and introduced spices from the Middle East. The khans, often practical men of war, found themselves surrounded by the living essence of the lands they had conquered. This blending of cultures was not accidental. For the Mongols, every captured woman was both a symbol and a resource. A noble bride could secure the loyalty of her people. A skilled artisan could introduce techniques unknown to the steppe. Even those without noble blood contributed by raising children who carried the legacy of empire in their veins. And yet, at the heart of the harem lay the same paradox that defined the Mongol Empire itself: fear and opportunity intertwined. For every woman who gained the Khan's trust, many more lived in silence, their stories swallowed by history. Their struggles remain in the shadows, but the very fact that the empire endured for generations suggests that their unseen labor and subtle influence played a role far greater than chroniclers ever admitted. The harem was more than a gilded prison. It was a hidden council, a cultural hub, and sometimes a battlefield of whispers where women shaped the course of history without ever stepping onto the open field. When we imagine the Mongol harems, it is easy to picture princesses draped in silk or noblewomen caught between politics and survival. But the reality stretched far beyond these few privileged figures. For every royal consort, there were dozens, sometimes hundreds, of ordinary women taken from conquered towns and villages. Their lives rarely found a place in official chronicles, yet their silent endurance carried a weight of its own. These women arrived at the Mongol camps with nothing but fear in their hearts. Some had lost husbands and families in the chaos of war. Others were marched across endless steppes, unsure if they would ever see their homeland again. The chronicles may call them spoils of conquest, but behind those cold words lay stories of resilience and unimaginable strength. Life for these captives was starkly different from that of noble brides. They were often put to work as servants, caretakers, or even concubines without status. Their clothing was simple, their quarters modest, and their lives ruled by the needs of others. Yet even here, in the shadows of empire, survival demanded resourcefulness. One of their greatest strengths was adaptability. A woman from Rus might learn the basics of Mongolian speech within months, allowing her to communicate with guards or other captives. A Persian girl skilled in embroidery could catch the eye of a noble by adorning garments with patterns unseen on the steppes. A Chinese servant might introduce new methods of brewing tea, subtly transforming the daily rituals of the Khan's household. Through these small acts, ordinary women carved niches for themselves. They turned necessity into opportunity, slowly building value in the eyes of those who ruled over them. And while they may not have swayed the course of great battles, they influenced the texture of daily life in the Mongol world. Some even found ways to exercise quiet power. The mothers of the Khan's children, no matter their origins, gained a measure of respect. A boy born of a captive woman could one day rise in status, carrying his mother's memory with him. History tells us that the Mongol aristocracy often acknowledged such children, blending bloodlines from across the vast empire. Behind each of those children stood a mother who had once been just another captive. But survival was not only about securing favor. It was also about solidarity. Captive women formed bonds with one another, supporting each other in secret ways. They shared food when rations ran short, whispered lullabies from their homelands to soothe frightened children, and taught each other the skills needed to endure. These quiet networks of resilience may not appear in official records, but they formed the backbone of everyday survival. There are hints, too, that some women used their position to pass along information. A servant moving between chambers could overhear whispers of political intrigue. A maid from Persia might carry knowledge of trade routes. Even if they never intended it, their presence linked the Mongols to the cultures they had conquered. In this way, the captives became living bridges, unrecognized diplomats of empire. And while the grandeur of Mongol history often focuses on khans and generals, the endurance of these forgotten women left its own imprint. They kept traditions alive in foreign lands. They carried stories, songs, and rituals across borders, planting cultural seeds that would grow long after the empire faded. Though their names are lost, their resilience echoes. Each captive who survived embodied the paradox of Mongol rule: brutality mixed with opportunity, despair entwined with adaptation. They remind us that history is not only written in the deeds of rulers but also in the quiet determination of those who endured their power. The story of these women is a reminder that even in the darkest times, survival itself can be an act of defiance, and that strength is not always loud or celebrated, but sometimes whispered in the night, carried in lullabies, or stitched into the fabric of a robe. As the Mongol Empire stretched across half the known world, its nature began to change. What had once been an unstoppable storm of horsemen gradually transformed into a vast system of cities, trade routes, and administrations. The endless steppe still defined the Mongol heart, but the empire could not rule only from horseback. It required governors, merchants, scribes, and within this transformation, the lives of women, especially those once taken as captives, entered a new and more complicated phase. In the early days, women in Mongol camps lived in felt yurts, their tasks tied to the rhythm of nomadic life. But as Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty in China and other khanates built capitals in Persia and Central Asia, these women found themselves within stone walls, far from the winds of the steppe. The empire had created cities of splendor: Karakoram with its temples and workshops, Khanbaliq, later Beijing, with its grand palaces, and Samarkand glowing like a jewel along the Silk Road. For the women, this shift meant new rules and new dangers. Inside cities, surveillance grew stronger. Eunuchs and guards closely monitored the harems. Palace regulations dictated everything, from clothing colors to the way women moved through corridors. While the yurts of the steppe allowed a sense of open space, the marble halls of the cities closed around them like cages. Yet, city life also offered opportunities impossible on the steppe. In the urban centers, women encountered scholars, monks, and artisans. They learned new languages and customs, and in some cases, became mediators between cultures. A Persian woman in China might teach her children Arabic prayers alongside Chinese poetry. A Russian-born concubine could introduce foods and traditions from her homeland. In these ways, the Mongol cities became melting pots of traditions, with women at their heart. Some women rose higher in influence than ever before. Court records hint at queens and consorts advising khans on trade and diplomacy. In Persia, women of noble descent were given estates and commanded wealth in their own right. In China, imperial women sponsored temples and schools, their names etched into inscriptions still visible today. Their roles may have been unofficial, but their presence shaped the identity of the new Mongol-ruled world. At the same time, contradictions deepened. The very cities that symbolized power also magnified inequalities. While noble-born women walked in embroidered silks, countless others remained invisible servants, scrubbing palace floors or working in kitchens that fed thousands. These women rarely left the shadows of history, yet without them, the empire's brilliance would have crumbled. Daily life, too, was filled with paradox. Women in harems dined on exotic delicacies from across the empire, dried fruits from Persia, spices from India, wines from the Caucasus. But abundance came with danger. Poison remained a constant fear, and every dish was tasted before reaching the lips of the favored. Rivalries grew sharper within city walls, where isolation bred envy and whispers echoed louder than ever. Beyond the palaces, women also shaped the empire through trade. Along the Silk Road, Mongol protection allowed merchants to travel more safely than ever before. Many women, once captives, now worked in markets, selling goods, weaving cloth, or managing inns. Though their lives remained difficult, these roles gave them a chance to reclaim fragments of independence. The transition from steppe to city reshaped identity itself. Captive women who once wandered windswept plains now stood in crowded bazaars, their children speaking a blend of languages unknown to their ancestors. They became citizens of a global empire, a world where East met West in ways unseen before. But beneath this grandeur, the same question lingered. Who truly held power? Was it the Khan on his throne, the generals commanding armies, or the women whispering in corridors, raising heirs, and weaving bonds of culture behind palace walls? History suggests that all three shared the stage. The Mongol Empire's strength came not only from conquest, but from absorption of people, skills, and traditions. And women, especially those taken from conquered lands, were central to that process. They were forced into the empire's fabric, yet through resilience, creativity, and quiet influence, they helped define it. The stone walls of cities did not free them, but they changed the battlefield. No longer just the servants of yurts, women became unseen architects of the empire's cultural identity. In their survival, in their ability to adapt, lay the living proof that history is shaped as much by whispers in the palace as by swords on the field. By the 14th century, the great Mongol Empire that had once thundered across continents began to fracture. The vast dominion split into khanates, the Yuan in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Each carried echoes of the steppe, but the unity that had made the empire unstoppable was gone. With its decline, countless lives that had been swept into its tide, especially the women, were left in the margins of history. The chronicles of the age spoke endlessly of khans, generals, and battles. Rarely did they pause to mention the women who cooked, raised children, advised rulers, or endured life in silence. And yet, their legacy lived on in quieter ways. It lived in the languages spoken by their descendants, half Persian, half Mongol, half Russian, half Chinese. It lived in the foods carried across borders, in the embroidery patterns passed down through generations, in the lullabies that blended melodies of distant homelands. The children of these women became the living bridges of empire. They bore the features of many nations, their bloodlines entwined with the steppe. In the courts of Persia and China, princes and princesses of mixed heritage sat beneath golden thrones, symbols of the empire's diversity. Their very existence proved that the Mongol conquest, however brutal, had forever changed the face of Eurasia. But the legacy of the women was not only cultural. It was also symbolic. Their stories remind us that empires are not built by swords alone. Behind every rider who galloped into legend stood countless women whose labor sustained him, whose quiet presence held together the fragile fabric of daily life. History may not have recorded their names, but without them, the empire would have crumbled sooner. Even in their suffering, there was resilience. A captive who survived exile to a distant camp, a mother who raised her child to greatness, a servant who preserved her homeland's traditions in a foreign palace. Each of them defied oblivion. Their silence became its own kind of strength, a survival that echoes across centuries. Modern historians are beginning to re-examine these hidden voices. Through archaeology, art, and scattered records, they uncover hints of women who once seemed invisible. A gravestone inscribed with both Persian and Mongolian script. A fragment of silk embroidered with Slavic motifs found in a Chinese palace. A song remembered in Central Asia that carries traces of a Russian melody. These fragments tell us that women of the Mongol world were not erased entirely. They left behind a legacy woven into the fabric of civilizations. And yet, their greatest contribution may be the lesson they leave us. That power is not always loud, and influence is not always visible. Empires rose and fell, Khans ruled and died, but the survival of these women ensured that the human story continued. They remind us that resilience itself is a form of defiance, one that outlasts conquest. Today, when we stand on the ruins of Karakoram or walk through the halls of the Forbidden City, the voices of the women of the Mongol Empire still linger in the silence. They whisper of loss, but also of strength. They remind us that history is more than battles and crowns. It is also lullabies sung in foreign lands, meals cooked in strange kitchens, and the unrecorded courage of those who endured. The Mongol Empire may have vanished, but the legacy of its women endures. It lives in the cultures that blended, in the languages that mixed, in the people who carry their blood. And perhaps, most importantly, it lives in the reminder that even in the darkest of times, survival itself can be the most powerful legacy of all.